I know this might sound like entirely strange, but before we could tell the whole story, we had to actually know the story of London. And but before we could know the story of London, we actually need to take a look at Germany. And that means going back and looking at Daniel Moglen, especially his woodblock carving in the Pandoros Sextiatetus, the Pandorum of the Sixth Age, 1617, where we had that block carving of the island. And just take a look at this and just tell me what is strange. We've got this absolutely beautiful carving on the right hand side, immensely detailed, and then what do we have on the left? Now, out of over 300 examples, I have never seen a green man which has never made it on the page. It's actually been printed like half off the page. Sure, I've seen examples that might have the rings missing, where it is planned, you can see where they've not been printed or they've not been inked. But here, it's actually off the page. And if we keep that in mind and we take a second look at this woodblock carving, and we see errors, and now we've took a look at the green man a little bit, we can start to see like printing errors. The right here on the left, it's missed inks and stuff like that. There's just so many errors that it's extreme errors. And we have this axe here cutting the wood, and I think that's actually now in reference to the fact that the woodblock carving has been cut off. And furthermore to that, I like to think as well that we discussed the fact that we have horns on this woodblock carving, and this block of wood that's sitting on this promontory has this kind of shape which could suggest two horns. And if you take a stand back and look, I think this block on this island represents a woodblock carving. And furthermore, when they talk about the Sea of Opinion, Pelagus Opinion, the Sea of Opinion could very well be books, as there's a multitude of books and everyone has an opinion. But I like to look at the damage here on this block that we can see. We can actually notice that there's a little chink here in the left, and this cross is positioned on another little kind of chink here. And you might think this kind of childish, but I'm not trying to fit the block on the block. I'm just trying to show the suggestion that this cross is in the position of one of the damage, the large damage, and then the piece on the left has also got a corresponding piece of damage, and the route that travels into the block is basically in alignment with the centre of the green man. And I like to think now that this crosses with the lantern is now a beacon, as it's something to look for or something to follow. So I think the story of the London Green Man and this damage, which I'm going to show you in quite a lot of detail, is where the story is being told from the German point of view. So what we have here is the Green Man spreadsheet, and this document was originally created in a Green Man group where a collection of people came together and helped track down a lot of these examples. We had no idea obviously how big it was going to get, and a lot of people chipped in, especially a couple of people done a lot of work towards it, right Mary? Especially. But a lot of the work came after the collection of some of them. There was still more to add, but a lot of the work came with kind of like understanding it. And so what we have here on this page is basically a breakdown of everything. It's the title, we'll have the year, the author, the city, content, publisher, printer. Some information is blank, some we have, some we don't. And we have a link to the World Catalogue so we can at some point trace more information if we need. And then we have a link to the actual physical book where you can see a physical facsimile. And even an image, we've actually taken an image and put it together. What is more kind of important here is this information on the right. This is what kind of helped narrow all of these examples down. And I will show you the size of the spreadsheet, but I just want to give you an example of here it lists what type of block, and then it will say does it have damage, and then it will ID that type of damage. So here we can see we have yes, A, yes, C, yes, C. Now what that means is that this damage has been duplicated. We can show this damage as a duplication. Now this is one 1600 and the other one is 1598 and it is block C. Now if we come and have a look at here, A, B, C, C shows us an arrow pointing to what could be a missing part of the mustache and ring. So if we come back to the example, here is the 1600 version, C, it's got a missing ring, and up here is the 1598 version, C, and it's got the missing ring. And further to that, you can see a blemish in the top, and the blemish is also present here. The corner's been wiped off, and the corner's been wiped off, so there's a really strong chance that these two were actually printed together. So what we found is we could actually start to tell when sheets were used together or transported together, and we could then remove a lot of blocks as unimportant because they were mass duplicates. I'll just zoom out and we can just see the kind of depth that we've got here. Obviously this allows us to filter this information and extract it in a way that helps us, whether it's by date or by printer or by author or by location. The information this allows us to get is quite staggering. And then to break it down into further batches, as you can see up here on the right, the damage that was sustained, and then we could group them together again. And having each one giving us an example so we can see quickly, we could see what type of block we were dealing with or whatever damage. And this one here is basically just labeling all the individual different types of blocks that were found. The thing that allowed me to do was post out a timeline for what we call block C or London. And also in this timeline, what I've done is add the other blocks that had some interaction with the people of London. And that would be the blocks that we discussed in the videos at the start. That is going to be the block G and the block A. Those are the two blocks that originated in Zurich. And then we're going to deal with the block C, which is the London block, and how they intermingle with each other. And what we have here is a timeline that's been put together. This is just London alone in the examples that's been found in and around London. And what this does is allowed us to bring out not a message but a direction as such. Because the amount that's been collected, we can lay out a map. Just zoom out, you can maybe see it a little bit. That's as far. What I will do, I will explain what all these mean. When you see the pink colour, this pink colour basically means that this block is not part of the London block. It's added because it shows a significant or an important part of the timeline. Like here we would have block G entering its beginning of its life, so hence it's on the timeline. Another block here, which is not the London block, but it plays a part in the timeline. And block A here, it's not block from London, but it plays a part. You can see where we're going with this, and we've managed to build up a picture from start to finish of the block in London, and then when it finally leaves London. Now what we've done is, green basically means okay, it's good, there is no damage. Then the next step to its right would be the orange. Now the orange is what I class as damage 1. And then to the right would be damage 2. Sadly, some of the quality of the copies, especially that came from the Igbo, the early English books online, is quite bad, but green is good, orange is damage 1 on the left, and red is damage 2 on the right. Now, as you can see here, there's no damage on the right or the left. Here we have the small damage on the left and the damage on the right, so hence it has the orange and the red for left and right. Left and right. Left and right, so orange and red. Now what we've done also, as an example, is the black is something that we can group together. Now here, after the block left London, it moved over to somebody like a Hugo Grotius, and what we can see here, if you look close, these have been grouped together because it has the small damage on the left, hence it's orange, and it's got this black because if you look closely, we can see, I think I can zoom in a little bit more, we have a mist ink here and a mist ink line here. It's the same for this, it's the same here, it's got the same damage, same here, it's got the same damage, and hence we are able to group them together to say these were all printed together. So what we're going to do is, we're going to zoom out and take a kind of look at what could possibly be going on in greater depth. Now, green is good, red is bad, orange is middle bad. So it starts off in a good life, and then we've got double damage, and then it's good life, double damage, good life, 1 damage, double damage, good life, good life, good life, 1 damage. So there's something going on here, because how, we will go into it in greater detail, but I like to think that this has kind of been a deliberate aspect, and I'm looking forward to explaining it. So what I'll try to do, I'll try to explain exactly what's kind of going on here. And we already talked about how the origin of the blocks and stuff, they are included in the timeline, but we're going to concentrate more on damage and see what that can kind of tell us. So it does start here with John Dee beginning the C block, and there's no damage. It's coming down, it's green. We're starting at 1582 for block C, there's no damage. We're coming down, coming down. What you see here, these are the blocks that we spoke about in the previous videos, how they were created and how they got to London, but we're concentrating on the block C. So now we're at 1599, so we've already travelled quite a number of years and there's no damage. And then we move on in the same year and we see the damage that I explained before on the two sides, and we've moved on to a Valentine Sims printer. And if we keep coming down, it's all Valentine Sims at this time, and all are damaged. And then at the same 1603, we then come on to 1605, and there's no damage. You can see green, green. And then it comes back to Valentine Sims, we've got damage, comes away from Valentine Sims, there's no damage, back to Valentine Sims, it's damage. So that can mean a couple of things. Either there's 2 blocks, or there's sheets printed in bulk or en masse and sold at a later date, just with the tail or the green man on the bottom. I think they're called sheet cancels. And that would explain how we are seeing this 2 separate lives. And if we keep digging a little bit deeper, I will take us down to the end of the life because it might help explain the start. And these two at the bottom are for the future story. These are additional London blocks that came about after the 1650. Nothing to do with the block C for now. Now, what happened after it leaves London? It ends up in the hands of a Hugo Herman, and then on to like a Hugo Grotius. And this is in 1628, it appears, brand new, undamaged. And that's very strange, because we've just seen a lot of damage, and now this is like 30-40 years in advance and there's no damage. Perhaps there was a third block, but if we look down another nearly 20 years, it's still over in Europe, and it's in Amsterdam, and we can see one damage. And on the last 4 times it shows up, this damage is present, but it's also got a telltale sign of a print. We can see here, miss ink, miss ink, missing ink, missing ink. So we can tell that these 4 were printed together. But wait, I thought we've just blamed Valentine Sims for damage. You remember how the block split off? One with no damage in its life, and then Valentine Sims had the damage, and there was no damage at all on the other route that it had taken. So how come we have this here and it's not Valentine Sims, and we've got damage 1, orange damage 1. Now if we go back to Valentine Sims, we will see that Valentine Sims all has 1 and 2, 1 and 2, Valentine Sims, 1 and 2. Now surely in order to get the damage on the left and the right, you must have the damage on one side at some stage. In order to have damage on both sides, at some stage there must have been damage on one side. But Valentine Sims doesn't show that. Valentine Sims only shows damage on both sides. So how can we then understand why we have damage on one side when we're blaming the Valentine Sims handling of the block when it separates to a good condition and a bad condition and lives 2 lives? How can we blame this gentleman for something he's done? He must have had a copy taken before the second damage was done, and not before Valentine Sims could use it with the first damage. That seems quite strange and hard to take in. But let's just take another look, because at Valentine Sims, if we look closely here, the black, we can see this double damage with the dot. We've got double damage with the dot here. This is a printing blemish. Double damage with the dot. Double damage with the dot. Double damage. Oh, wait a minute. He's got the dot here, but he doesn't have the damage on the left hand side. That's the first and only time we've seen that. And here we go, same again, it's got the damage the right and the left, and it's got the dot. So this was printed at the same time as this, and this, all with Valentine Sims. Yet, for some reason, we have a problem, because if these are all printed at the same time, the damage is present on both sides for all of them, apart from this one, the Psalms or prayers taken from the Holy Scriptures, commonly called the Psalms of the King, basically. So here we have, for the first time, this left damage is not present. And if we look back at the end, both are present. Well, the one, sorry, on the left is present here, and there's no damage on the right. And the one up there, it's the one, there's no damage on the left, but the damage is on the right. So even that doesn't correspond with this. So what that means is that something had to be done at the time of printing this copy here. this damage that was on this side would have to be repaired or mocked or made up. This block is a total anomaly. Who wrote this block? Oh, it was anonymous. That's a surprise. So what we're getting to see here is this damage has been manipulated. In order to have like 2 damage, there must be a stage of having it 1. And all these have been printed together, but yet this is the only block that doesn't have that damage on the left. That left is only either present together with damage on the right or on itself. There is no other that the damage is not on the left and on the damage is on the right, and they are printed together, meaning that must mean manipulation. This has been damaged, or this one here has been repaired enough to make this print. So this spreadsheet is allowing us to see some kind of manipulation. So by seeing the start of its life and seeing its end of its life, what that tells us is at 1628 it is brand new, but we've seen damage back at 1600. And then it arrives 20 years later and it's only got the damage in the left. And they are all printed together. So it's showing us that there's manipulation taking place. This has been kept specially, and then it's showing you this one that's printed together and it's damaged in the left. So when you think there's another group that's been printed together and it's this one and the damage is on the left and the right, but there's one that only has it on the right, yet it was all printed together. It's a case of scoring things off your list, and this one by Valentine Sims, anonymous, is the one that sticks out totally like a sore thumb. And what is strange as well, if you come down and we have a look here, The Merry Devil of Edmonton is a stage play, and it's by Henry Ballard, and it's got the damage and it's printed at the same time because it's got the printing dot, and it's William Shakespeare. So what I'm taking from this here is that the importance here is William Shakespeare is very important, and somebody anonymous. Again, it's getting very interesting. Now all we have to do is kind of take a zoom out here, because if we take a kind of look as well, when the damage stops at 1608, on that year, we get to see some things like a William Alexander. Like this gentleman here, he is 1616 and there's no damage at all. But that's kind of not a problem, because you can see he's in this batch of no damage of William Shakespeare's work and Ben Johnston's work. So you can kind of see that the people involved in manipulating the timeline of when something is damaged and it's not damaged, William Shakespeare, Ben Jonson, but who is this William Alexander? And what's funny about William Alexander is 1616, but if we look earlier for William Alexander, we've got William Alexander in 1607. He's one of the gentlemen that's got the double damage block that was printed together. Now, if we take a look here, we have a William Shakespeare that has been printed together. We have this gentleman, William Alexander, that was printed together, but they have separate blocks, they have separate books. So even though this gentleman's printed together, there is nothing with John Hind to compare it to. William Alexander does have, so William Alexander started with the old block and then had the new block after it. So this gentleman was there at the start and the end. So he is just as important as what seems to be the anonymous user and the Shakespeare user. So what I think is we should really take a look at this William Alexander. Because it's this kind of time, William Alexander, this is the same kind of time that Daniel Moglen published his Block A in the Pandora Sextia Tetis. And Block A, before it got to Daniel Moglin, how I've always said things started in London, John Dee actually used the block before him. But what confused me and how we never found it before was John Dee actually used this block, but he never used it in London. He used it in 1591 in Frankfurt. So John Dee's had his hands on Block C, Block G, Block A, and this is his important Monas Hieroglyphia in 1591. So this Green Man timeline is allowing us to see how these people were interacting on the mainland Europe and in the UK, and we've got some very good targets to take a look at, because just off the top of my mind, we're now looking at people like William Cecil. He was the most important man in the country at the time. We're looking at John Dee, the spy master, an anonymous person who I think we believe now it's Francis Bacon. And these people had free roam around Europe and were recorded to be in Europe. But it's when we take these people into account and we add William Alexander and we start to look at these backgrounds, these were the people that was in charge of like setting up Newfoundland, the people who were in charge of setting up Nova Scotia. These are the people who had the money, the control of the country basically, other than the Queen. I think we're beginning to get a really good picture thanks to the Green Man. To help us understand the Green Man spreadsheet, what I have done here is placed everything onto a type of flowchart to help us understand the changes that were taking place in the spreadsheet. And it begins, now what I must say is that not every example from the spreadsheet has been placed on this. This is just to give an idea, and the important dates have been included. It was just to make it easier to see. We have used some examples to help tell the story. And we're going to begin here with John Wolfe, and it's 1582. This is not when it first begins. But what we can see is we have a nice example. There is no damage on the left, there is no damage on the right. And this carries on like this, down to 1591. You can see there's no damage on the left, there's no damage on the right. But at 1591, it is handed over to a printer, John Dunter. Now, this is quite important because it takes in certain characters like George Peele, who you can find in the Green Man website. We will be looking at his work very interestingly because it contains Block C and also Block G. Very important. But if we look here, there is still no damage on this block. Again, I must apologise for the quality. Some of the quality is because the only examples that we can get is through the early English books online via a subscription service through the American Renaissance Society. And this is the best access that me personally can afford, basically, at this stage. But we can clearly see that we have a piece of mist ink here on the left. Again, we can still see the mist ink on the left. Here again, the same mist ink. Sorry for the quality. Same again, mist ink. So what we can see is between 1593 and 1595 with John Dunter, these examples were all printed at the same time. Or else, during the re-inking process, this mist ink would have been covered. That's a logical assumption. So we can start to group these examples together because of these telltale signs. Now, if we come back to the main timeline, we can see the block 1599, then it's next used in 1605, and there is no damage. The timeline continues. There's no damage on the left or the right. No damage on the left or the right. Still no damage. Now this goes to 1639, and then the block travels over to Europe. And in Europe, we have these fine examples. Now if we look closely, we only have the damage on the left. damage on the left, on the left, on the left. Now, that would make sense, unless both damages occur at the same time. One side would need to be damaged, and then another side would be damaged after it, or they both occur at the same time. But what we can do is group these together, because if we look, we can see a piece of mist ink here, and a piece of mist ink here on the right. The same mist ink, and the same mist ink on the right, the same, and the same again. So what we can do is group these together as being printed at the same time. Whether the block had transported to Europe or sheet cancels were made, where the block would be imprinted on a blank piece of paper and then shipped as paper. We like to call these sheet cancels. But we have a problem, because if we take a look after 1599, where the block is in great condition, it is handed over to Valentine Sims. Now, Valentine Sims, in the same 1599, straight away we can see the damage on the left and the damage on the right. Left, right, left, right. So, why are we seeing the damage of 1599 having on both sides, when 40 years later, 43 years later, it appears in Europe and only has damage on one side? Surely that doesn't make sense. We are attributing the damage to Valentine Sims here at 1599, both damage occurring at the same time. We have not been able to come across an example of the Green Man that has damage on the left-hand side, or basically no sides from Valentine Sims. Valentine Sims must be responsible for making this damage, and the copies that turned up in Europe must have been printed in 1599, or else there would be two types of damage there. We only have one on that side. So somebody is deliberately keeping sheets of paper or sheet cancels for 40 years. Because the block must not have travelled, because the block is still here, making all of these copies that have no damage whatsoever. So what exactly is going on here? And if we look, we come down to 1602, damage left and the right, left and right, and there is no ink blemish on the right here. But if we come across the same date of 1602 from Valentine Sims, we can see the damage on the left and the right, and we've got this circular ink bubble or blemish here, and we can trace this. Sorry, this is a bad copy, but we can still make out the damage on the left, the damage on the right, and you can make out the circular ink blemish. Here we can see it clearer. This is 1605, damage on the left, damage on the right, and we have this ink blemish. Same again, here the ink blemish, here damage right, damage left, ink blemish, damage right, damage left, ink blemish. So what we can say is these were all printed at the same time, because in the same year of 1602 he has both damage, but there is no ink bubble or ink blemish or ink dot. The dot will be very important. So what we can assume from this is that these ones on the right were all printed at the same time, because we have an example of one at 1602 at the same time frame that doesn't have this ink blemish but still has two types of damage. So these are just practical reasoning steps that we can take, because what we can do is break down, like we did here when it travelled to Europe, or with Danta, based on missed ink and or damage. We can then group these together. But what is fascinating here, if these are indeed all printed at the same time with Valentine Sims, why do we have the very last one that we have on record of 1608, Valentine Sims, that has the damage on the left and damage on the right and the ink blemish, but it's from Henry Ballard? Why is it not with Valentine Sims? if these were all printed at the same time. This tells us that somebody must have handed this Henry Ballard a specific sheet of paper with a print on it that was printed at the same times as the one above it. And it just happens to be in a play from William Shakespeare, or it has been accredited to William Shakespeare. We will look at this play in greater detail. So, several other instances occur here, because if we look here, there's one that's very telling. Sorry about that. If I go through it for you, damage on the right, damage on the left, blemish. Right, left, blemish. Left, right, blemish. Left, you can zoom in here, you can just kind of see it. Left, right, blemish. And up here we have the right, the blemish, but no damage. So what is going on here? How can this one not have damage on the left along with the others if they're all printed at the same time? No other instance does the block appear only with the damage on the right. If we come back down to Europe, we can see that the damage is on the left. How is this even possible? Unless some manipulation has been taking place. And of course, the author is anonymous. We already discussed this when we were looking at the spreadsheet, but just seeing it in an order helps to understand the problems we have. But we also have other problems. Like here we have William Alexander. Again, we will find this gentleman in the bio. We do have some examples of work of his. But here in 1607, we have got the damage on the left and the right, and we've got the blemish. But previous to that, William Alexander used the same block. If we look up here in the timeline, we can see here in 1616, William Alexander. And we have looked at these two books before. We have done some work on this, but if we look at 1616, there is no damage on his block. None whatsoever. But William Alexander, in 1607, 10 years or so beforehand, his block is damaged. So how does this person explain to himself 10 years before he's using this damaged block, and then 9 or 10 years later, there's no damage on the block? William Alexander, a very important publication for us. So just using the spreadsheet, although we can get a timeline, 3 copies or 3 publications stand out. The William Alexander publications, the anonymous publication, which doesn't have the damage on the left, and then the William Shakespeare, who is done by a different printer, although it bears all the hallmarks of being printed at the same time, along with the Valentine Sims. I hope this cleared up some of the confusion, and please, if you think you can help, come along to the Trail of the Green Man. We would love to see you there. Join the Discord or come join the Facebook group. Perhaps you have some editing skills, or you would like to work on the website to help improve it, or you would like to contribute by helping moderate in the Discord channel, or you would love to try to figure out some of these inconsistencies, or if you can't spare the time but you would like to help, please donate to the website and it will help us keep the lights on and possibly buy me a nice cup of tea to help me figure this out. Thanks for watching.